Good evening, and welcome to Three Men in a Boat, Chapter 9. Hello, boy. Sit down. There you go. George is introduced to work. He's missed instincts of 2 tow lines, ungrateful conduct of a double sculling skiff, towers and rowers, a use discovered for lovers, strange disappearance of an elderly lady, much haste, less speed, being towed by girls, exciting sensation, the missing lock or the haunted river, music saved. We made George work now that we got him. He didn't want to work, of course. That goes without saying. He'd had a hard time in the city, so he explained. Harris, who was callous in his nature, not prone to pity, said, "Ah, and now you're having a hard time on the river for a change. Change is good for everybody. Out you get." He could not, in conscience, not even George's conscience, object, though he did suggest that perhaps it would be better for him to stop in the boat and get tea ready, whilst Harris and I towed, because getting tea is such worrying work, and Harris and I looked tired. The only reply we made to this, however, was to pass him over the tow line, and he took it and stepped out. There is something very strange and unaccountable about a tow line. You roll it up with as much patience and care as you would take to fold a new pair of trousers, and 5 minutes afterwards, when you pick it up, it is one ghastly, soul-revolting tangle. I do not wish to be insulting, but I firmly believe that if you took an average tow line and stretched it out across the middle of a field, and then turned your back on it for 30 seconds, that when you looked around, you would find that it had got itself in a heap in the middle of the field, and had twisted itself up, and tied itself in knots, and lost its 2 ends, and all become loops, and would take a good half hour, sitting down on the grass, and swearing all the while, to disentangle it. That is my opinion of tow lines in general. Of course, there may be honourable exceptions. I do not say that there are not. There may be tow lines that are credits to their profession, conscientious, respectable tow lines. Tow lines that do not imagine they are crochet work and try to knit themselves up in antimascars the instant they are left to themselves. I say there may be such tow lines. I sincerely hope there are, but I have not met with them. This tow line I had taken in myself just before we got to the lock. I would not let Harris touch it because he is careless. I looped it round slowly and cautiously and tied it up in the middle and folded it in 2 and laid it down gently at the bottom of the boat. Harris had lifted it up scientifically and put it into George's hand. George had taken it firmly and held it away from him, and it had begun to unravel as if he were taking the swaddling clothes off a newborn infant. And before he had unwound a dozen yards, the thing was more like a badly made doormat than anything else. It is always the same, and the same sort of thing always goes on in connection with it. The man on the boat is trying to disentangle it and thinks all the fault lies with the man who rolled it up. And when the man upriver thinks a thing, he says it. "What have you been trying to do? Make a fishing net out of it? Why, you've made a jolly nice mess, you have. Why couldn't you wind it up properly, you silly dummy?" He grunts from time to time as he struggles wildly with it and lays it out flat on the towpath and runs round and round trying to find the end. On the other hand, the man who wound it up thinks the whole cause of the muddle rests with the man who is trying to unwind it. "It was all right when you took it," he exclaimed indignantly. "Why didn't you think what you were doing? You go about things such a slapdash style. You'd get a scaffolding pole entangled, you would." And they feel so angry with one another that they would like to hang each other over the thing. 10 minutes go by, and the first man gives a yell and goes mad, and dances on the rope and tries to pull it straight by seizing hold of the first piece that comes to his hand and hauling at it. Of course, this only gets into a tighter tangle than ever. Then the second man climbs out of the boat and comes to help him. They each get in each other's way and hinder one another. They both get hold of the same bit of line and pull it in opposite directions and wonder where it is caught. In the end, they do not get it clear and turn round and find the boat has drifted off and is making straight for the weir. This really happened once, to my knowledge. It was at Boveney, one rather windy morning. We were pulling downstream, and as we came round the bend, we noticed a couple of men on the bank. They were looking at each other with a bewildered and helplessly miserable expression as I have ever witnessed on a human countenance before or since, and they held a long tow line between them. It was clear that something had happened, so we eased up and asked them what was the matter. "Why, our boat's gone off," they replied in an indignant tone. "We just got it out to disentangle the tow line, and when we looked around, it was gone." And they seemed hurt at what they evidently regarded as a mean and ungrateful act on part of the boat. We found the truant for them half a mile further down, held by some rushes, and we brought it back to them. I bet they did not give that boat another chance for a week. I shall never forget the picture of those two men walking up and down the bank with the tow line looking for their boat. One sees a great many funny incidents up the river in connection with towing. One of the most common is the sight of a couple of towers walking briskly along, deep in animated discussion, while the man in the boat, 100 yards behind them, is frantically shrieking for them to stop, and frantic signs of distressing are made with a scull. Something has gone wrong. Maybe the rudder has come off, or the boat hook has slipped overboard, or his hat has dropped into the river and is floating downstream. He calls them to stop, quietly and politely at first. "Hi, stop a minute, will you?" he shouts cheerily. "I've dropped my hat overboard." Then, "Hi, Tom, Dick, can't you hear?" in not quite such an affable tone. Then, "Hi, confound you, you dunder-headed idiots. Hi, stop, oh, you." After that, he springs up and dances about and roars himself red in the face and curses everything he knows. And the small boys on the bank stop and jeer at him and pitch stones at him as he is pulled along and past them at a rate of 4 miles an hour and can't get out. Much of this sort of trouble would be saved if those who are towing would keep remembering that they are towing and give a pretty frequent look around as to how their man is getting on. It's best to let one man tow. When there are two doing it, they get chattering and forget, and the boat itself, offering, as it does, but little resistance, is of no real service in reminding them of the fact. As an example of how utterly oblivious a pair of towers can be to their work, George told us, later in the evening, when we were discussing the subject after supper, of a very curious instance. He and 3 other men, so he said, were sculling a very heavily laden boat up from Maidenhead one evening. A little above Cockham Lock they noticed a fellow and a girl, both walking along the towpath, deep in an apparently interesting and absorbing conversation. They were carrying a boat hook between them, and attached to the boat hook was a tow line which trailed behind them, its end in the water. No boat was near, no boat was in sight. There must have been a boat attached to the tow line at some time or other. That was certain. But what had become of it? What ghastly fate had overtaken it? And those who had been left in it was buried in mystery. Whatever the accident may have been, however, it had in no way disturbed the young lady and gentleman who were towing. They had the boat hook, they had the line, and what seemed to be all they thought necessary to their work. George was about to call out and wake them up, but at that moment a bright idea flashed across him, and he didn't. He got the hitcher instead and reached over and drew in the end of their tow line and made a loop in it and put it over their mast, and then tidied up the sculls and went and sat down in the stern and lit his pipe along with his friends. and that young man and woman towed those 4 hulking chaps and the heavy boat up to Marlow. George said he never saw such thoughtful sadness concentrated into one glance before, as when, at the lock, the young couple grasped the idea that for the last 2 miles they had been towing the wrong boat. George fancied that if it had not been for the restraining influence of the sweet woman at his side, the young man might have given way to violent language. The maiden was the first to recover from her surprise, and when she did, she clasped her hands wildly and said, "Oh, Henry, where is Auntie?" "Did they ever recover the old lady?" asked Harris. George replied he did not know. Another example of the dangerous want of sympathy between the tower and the towed was witnessed by George and myself once near Walton. It was where the towpath shelves gently down into the water, and we were camping on the opposite bank, noticing things in general. By and by, a small boat came in sight, towed through the water at a tremendous pace by a powerful barge horse, on which sat a very small boy. Scattered about the boat, in a dreamy and reposeful attitudes, lay 5 fellows, the man who was steering having a particularly restful appearance. "I should like to see him pull the wrong line," muttered George as they passed. And at that precise moment the man did it, and the boat rushed up the bank with a noise like the ripping of 40,000 linen sheets. 2 men, a hamper, and 3 oars immediately left the boat on the larboard side, and reclined on the bank, and 1.5 moments after, 2 other men disembarked from the starboard and sat down among the boat hooks and sails and carpet bags and bottles. The last man went on 20 yards further and then got out on his head. This seemed to sort of lighten the boat, and it went on much easier, the small boy shouting at the top of his voice and urging his steed into a gallop. The fellows sat up and stared at one another. It was some seconds before they realized what had happened to them, but when they did, they began to shout lustily for the boy to stop. He, however, was much too occupied with the horse to hear them, and we watched them flying after him until the distance hid them from view. I cannot say I was sorry at their mishap. Indeed, I only wish that all the young fools who have their boats towed in this fashion, and plenty do, could meet with similar misfortunes. Besides the risk they run themselves, they become a danger and annoyance to every other boat they pass. Going at the pace they do, it is impossible for them to get out of anybody else's way, or for anyone else to get out of theirs. Their line gets hitched across your mast and overturns you, or it catches somebody in the boat and either throws them into the water or cuts their face open. The best plan is to stand your ground and be prepared to keep them off with the butt end of a mast. Of all the experiences in connection with towing, the most exciting is being towed by girls. It is a sensation that nobody ought to miss. It takes 3 girls to tow always, 2 to hold the rope, and 1 to run round and round and giggle. They generally begin by getting themselves tied up. They get the line round their legs and have to sit down on the path and undo each other, and then they twist it round their necks and are nearly strangled. They fix it straight, however, at last, and start off at a run, pulling the boat along at quite a dangerous pace. At the end of 100 yards, they are naturally breathless and suddenly stop, and all sit down on the grass and laugh, and your boat drifts out to the midstream and turns round before you know what has happened or can get hold of a scull. Then they stand up and are surprised. "Oh, look," they say, "he's gone right out in the middle." And they pull on steadily for a bit after this, and then, all at once, it occurs to one of them that she will pin up her frock, and they ease up for the purpose, and the boat runs aground. You jump up and push it off, and you shout at them not to stop. "Why, what's the matter?" they shout back. "Don't stop," you roar. "Don't what?" "Don't stop. Go on, go on." "Go back, Emily, and see what it is they want," says one. and Emily comes back and asks what it is. "What do you want?" she says. "Anything happened?" "No," you reply. "It's all right. Only go on, Don't stop." "Why not?" "Well, we can't steer if you keep stopping. You must keep some way on the boat." "Some way what?" "Some way you must keep the boat moving." "Oh, all right, I'll tell them." "Are we doing it all right?" "Oh, yes, very nicely. Only don't stop." "It all seems so difficult. I thought it was so hard." "No, it's simple enough. You just want to keep steady on, that's all." "I see. Give out my red shawl. It's under the cushion." You find the shawl and hand it out, and by the time another one has come back, she thinks that she will have hers too, and they take up Mary's on chance. But Mary does not want it, and so they bring it back and have a pocket comb instead. It's about 20 minutes before they get off again, and at the next corner they see a cow, and you have to leave the boat to chivvy the cow out of their way. There is never a dull moment while the girls are towing. George got the line right after a while, and towed us steadily on to Penton Hook. There we discussed the important question of camping. We decided to sleep on board that night, and either had to lay up there or go past Staines. It seemed early to think about shutting up then. However, with the sun still high in the heavens, we settled to push straight for Runnymede, and 3.5 miles further, a quiet wooded part of the river, where there is good shelter, seemed fair. We all wished, however, that we'd stopped at Penton Hook. 3 or 4 miles upstream is a trifle early in the morning, but it is weary at the end of a long day. You take no interest in the scenery during those last few miles. You do not chat nor laugh. Every half mile you cover seems like 2. You can hardly believe you are only where you are, and you are convinced that the map must be wrong. And when you have trudged along for what seems at least 10 miles, and still the lock is not in sight, you begin to seriously fear that somebody must have sneaked it and run off with it. I remember being terribly upset once upriver, in a figurative sense, I mean. I was with a young lady, a cousin on my mother's side, and we were pulling down to Goring. It was rather late, and we were anxious to get in. At least, she was anxious to get in. It was 6:30 when we reached Benson's lock, and dusk was drawing on, and she began to get excited then, and said she must be in to supper. I said it was a thing that I felt I wanted to be in at too, and I drew at the map I had with me to see exactly how far it was. I saw it was just 1.5 miles to the next lock, Wallingford, and 5 on from there to Cleeve. "Oh, it's all right," I said. "We'll be through the next lock before 7, and then there's only 1 more," and I settled down and pulled steadily away. We passed the bridge, and soon after that I asked her if she saw the lock. She said no, she did not see any lock. I said "oh," and pulled on. Another 5 minutes went by, and then I asked her to look again. "No," she said, "I can't see signs of a lock." You sure you know a lock when you see one?" I asked, hesitating, not wishing to offend her. The question did not offend her, however, and she suggested that I had better look for myself. So I laid down the sculls and took a view. The river stretched out straight before us in twilight for about 1 mile. Not a ghost of a lock was to be seen. "You don't think you've lost our way, do you?" asked my companion. I didn't see how that was possible, though, as I suggested we might have somehow got into a weir stream and be making for the falls. This idea did not comfort her in the least, and she began to get upset. She said we could both be drowned, and it was judgment on her for coming out with me. It seemed a little excessive punishment, I thought, but my cousin thought not, and hoped it would all be over soon. I tried to reassure her, and to make light of the whole affair. I said that the fact evidently was that I was not rowing as fast as I fancied I was, but that we should soon reach the lock now, and I pulled on for another mile, Then I began to get nervous myself. I looked again at the map. There was Wallingford Lock, clearly marked 1.5 miles below Benson's. It was a good, reliable map, and besides, I recollected the lock myself. I had been through it twice. Where were we? What had happened to us? I began to think it must all be a dream, and that I was really asleep in bed, and should wake up in a minute, and be told it was past 10. I asked my cousin if she thought it could be a dream, and she replied that she thought the same question, and that we both wondered if we were both asleep, and if so, who was the real one that was dreaming, and who was only the dream. It got quite interesting. I still went on pulling, however, and still no lock came in sight, and the river grew more and more gloomy and mysterious under the gathering shadows of night, and things seemed to be getting weird and uncanny, and I thought of hobgoblins and banshees and will-o'-the-wisps, and those wicked girls who sit up all night on rocks and lure people into whirlpools and things. And I wished I'd been a better man and knew more hymns. And in the middle of these reflections, I heard the blessed strains of "He's Got 'em On," played badly and on a concertina, and knew that we were saved. I do not admire the tones of a concertina as a rule, but oh, how beautiful the music seemed to both of us then, far, far more so than the voice of Orpheus or the lute of Apollo, or anything that sort would have sounded. Heavenly melody, in our state of mind, would have only still further harrowed us. A soul-moving harmony, correctly performed, we would have taken as a spirit warning and given up all hope. But the strains of "He's Got 'em On," jerked spasmodically and with involuntary variations out of a wheezy accordion, there was something singularly human and reassuring about this. The sweet sounds drew us nearer, and soon the boat from which they were worked came alongside us. It contained a party of provincial Aries and Ariettes out for a moonlight sail. There wasn't any moon, but that was not their fault. I never saw a more attractive, lovable people in all my life, and hailed them and asked if they could tell me the way to Wallingford Lock. And I explained I had been looking for it for the last 2 hours. "Wallingford Lock," they answered. "Law, love you, sir, that's been done away for over a year. Ain't no Wallingford Lock now, sir. You're close to Cleve now. Blow me tight. If it aren't the gentleman looking for Wallingford Lock here, Bill." I never thought about that. I wanted to fall upon their necks and bless them, but the stream was running too strong just there to allow this, so I had to content myself with the mere cold-sounding words of gratitude. I thanked them over and over again, and we said it was a lovely night, and we wished them all a pleasant trip. And I think I invited them all to come and spend a week with me, and my cousin said her mother would be pleased to see them as well. And we sang the Soldier's Chorus out of Faust, and got home in time for supper, after all. End of chapter 9. I do hope you're enjoying this little tale of 3 Men in a Boat. I know that I'm getting a lot from reading it, and I'd like to thank each and every person who's taken the time to leave a comment or feedback below the videos we've done so far. I am genuinely grateful for all of them. If you'd like to get a heads up as to when I'm doing the next chapter of 3 Men in a Boat, please feel free to subscribe down below and you'll get notifications when the next chapter is out. On that, I bid you good night.